So here we are on the cusp of a big election, midway through, partway through. I don't even know where we are with the pandemic. And for me, it really reminds me that a lot of us come to this practice looking for answers and looking for meaning. And you can't really fault us for doing that, right? Especially in when times are confusing and there is so much that is hard to understand how the world is operating right now. So of course, I've been on this path for a long time, or I've been doing this practice for a long time, as many of you have as well. And I think at first I really dove into study and dove into looking for answers anywhere that I could find them. And then over time, I've realized that this is not a path of answers. It's not a path of giving answers. It's a path of questions and a path of inquiry. And so yogis are not we may have some good answers every so often, but we aren't the people with answers. We are the people with questions. And that's ultimately what leads us to the next place and the next place and the next place. So what we're really developing, right, especially at this point where we can get a little bit stuck in like how we practice or how we identify with our practice or what we do with our practice, is we're breaking that down a little bit and coming back to a place of inquiry. And that is, to me, the point of moving really slowly and the point of moving out of gravity and getting out of these habit patterns of just going through pose after pose after pose and building up to something only to, what's the point, right? What is the point of what we do? And the point is to be curious. The point is to continue to be engaged and ask the questions that arise, whether they're questions about the body or questions about our relationship to what's around us, questions about what our purpose is in life, if there is a purpose in life, what meaning is, how we make meaning. These are all wonderful things to explore. And so while we're developing this insight and this willingness to ask questions and to be with what arises, we're also learning to live in the freedom that is conditionless, right? We're learning to understand the world that's around us as it's continually unfolding. So tonight, I wanted to offer a very brief introduction to the Four Noble Truths, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And if you are only familiar with one, you are familiar with the first one, which is the truth of dukkha, or the truth of suffering. And suffering is such a big and scary word, right? Dukkha, or the truth of dukkha. Dukkha is actually a range word. So it can cover anything from complete and utter sadness and despair to happiness. And this is because we know what it is. We know what suffering is when we see people who don't have enough to eat, when we feel the oppression of the systems around us, especially as women. We are all women, and how that keeps us from living our lives as freely as we could. We see the suffering that's caused from poor leadership and how this affects each of us. But what we often don't recognize too, and for good reason, because we want to stay in it, is that having everything that we want is also a form of suffering too. So in times of relative peace even, right, there's almost this sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something to happen that will rip away the people that we love, or will take the person who we care about most, or will take our health, or will ruin our house, or take our job. There are so many things that we have that are necessary for life in the culture that we live in. But having those things too is also a little bit scary. And this is the truth of dukkha, right? Just acknowledging that there is suffering. And I will say the thing that this practice has maybe done most for me is just shown me my own patterning and how I bring this on myself a little bit more. And that doesn't mean that I avoid it or am able to avoid it any better than anybody else, but I'm able to maybe be with it a little bit better than I was 2 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago when I first started this practice. And so it's just revealing the way that I get into my own way of freedom. And I think that that is ultimately such a wonderful gift, right? What else can you ask for? Yes, we can feel good in the body, and yes, we can know how to breathe well. These are all wonderful things, and there's an alchemical response between the body and the mind and the spirit. And so we need to do anything that we can to help this process along. But ultimately, the greatest gift is showing us that there is a direction that we can move, showing us that we do suffer, right? And that's ultimately what brings us to what we're doing here anyway to start with. So the good news is, the second noble truth is that there is a cause to our suffering, right? And I've touched on this a little bit, but in yoga language, in Vedic language, it's known as avidya, or ignorance. And ignorance is, it's not just ignorance of like not knowing that what kind of tea you have, right? Or not knowing everything there is to know about triangle pose. It is a much deeper ignorance than this. It is the assumption that we define who we are by the measure of what we have, or how we present ourselves, or who likes us or doesn't like us, by what our career is, by any of these identities that we take on. This is such a strong cause of suffering, right? That we are separate from the things that surround us, that we're separate from the people who look like they are suffering versus us, or that we are separate from the people who look like they have everything that we want. So it really leads to a sense of both grandeur, right? Oh, this overinflated ego of importance. And that's kind of part of the myopathy of a yoga practice that I'm sure everybody has felt. I feel this all the time. Is like, oh my gosh, I've become so self-important. I am most central in my life right now. Okay, I need to zoom out again. And then there's a sense too, and it's simultaneous, of unworthiness, of like, I don't deserve to have this life that I have, or I don't deserve to be able to feel good when so many people are suffering. I don't deserve to be able to explore every one of the gifts that I've been given, right? Every one of the gifts that you've been given. You do have that. You have that capability. The toll that we take, that this takes on us, right? All of this mental stress, this concern for where we are, what we're doing, what other people are doing, how it's affecting us, on and on and on and on and on. We can feel that in our bodies, right? We can feel it in the neck being tight. We can feel it in the shoulders scrunching up. We can feel it in digestion starting to close up a bit and not let go, right? The elimination system stops working as well. And we feel it all over the body. We see it in our relationships. We see these self-destructive patterns that we have. And for the most part, I think that we really understand, especially everybody in this room, we understand the effect of the mind on the body, right? We know that we store stress in the body from the mind. But we also forget that the, the reverse is true as well, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. So the stress that we encounter in the body affects the mind. And this really leads me to the physical practices that we are defining as yoga. And I in no way want this to sound like a rant. And certainly 90% of the people who are here have taken many, many of my classes in the past. Um, and I have no problem with how anybody practices. I think that moving quickly is sometimes really great. I think that moving intensely is sometimes really great. But I think that in our yoga practice, we don't have to ask it to fulfill all of the check marks. We don't have to ask it to check all of the boxes all of the time. So the most obvious, or maybe the most visual way example of how the body interacts with stress and that affects the entire system, affects the mind, is that there is a specific ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide in the lungs that is maintained. And when that ratio gets off, so just even from not breathing deeply or not breathing well or sitting for too long and constricting the iliopsoas, which we talked about earlier, which contracts the diaphragm and doesn't allow it to move freely and fluidly. When that ratio is off, it sends the body into a fight or flight response, right? So when we have too much carbon dioxide in the lungs, the entire system starts to perk up and sends us into a stress response, which then also has this effect on the mind, right? Because, and by mind, I mean the sort of thoughts or the chitta moving through, and we turn to a more fearful place. So we have no room, we have no flow in us, we kind of choke. And that could be just from how we're moving, how we're choosing to move, through the body. So you might just give yourself a little shake right now, right? It's kind of like, ooh, let's just loosen up a little bit. So over years, and this is I talk about sustainability in the practice all the time. And my view on how to do that has certainly shifted over time. But when you look at how you're practicing physically over a long span of time, you need to consider, we all need to consider what that compound effect is. So if we're going to yoga, if we're practicing yoga to connect with ourselves, to release stress, to feel grounded, to let go of anxiety, to whatever your intention is, right? To be enlightened, which happens from a very relaxed state, this opening to wisdom, then we really have to question all of this time that we spend pushing ourselves in a practice. We have to question why. Like, I think all the time, why was I teaching 35 chaturangas in one class with arm balances? It's crazy. It puts so much stress on the body. And this is just one example. I feel like everybody either loves or hates chaturanga. I love it in limited quantities, but we have to start approaching these practices as though we're in it for the long haul, because that is how we're intended to practice them. Yoga isn't a practice for a year. It's not a practice for 5 years. This is a practice for the rest of your life. And hopefully it continues to serve you for the rest of your life. So I think we know why we practice like this, right? We get a little caught up in the ego. We got caught up in that feeling of unworthiness. Like, if we could only do handstand, if we could only stick that great back bend, if we could only look like so-and-so in yoga pants, if whatever it is, if we could only measure up, then we can stop pushing ourselves. So that this practice we're doing to step off of the hamster wheel of all of this suffering, right? All of this mental, just massive mastication becomes another source of it, right? Just think about that. So how can we let that go? And this is maybe for any of us at any point, and maybe you're at this point, or maybe you're not at this point yet, or maybe you've been through this already. This is a place that we have to examine. How can I let go of how I identify with this practice? How can I identify, or how can I let go of how I identify with how I move my body? And what am I doing to serve myself? What am I doing to serve this practice that I have undertaken? So this is where the real practice is, right? In order to allow love to flow freely through the heart, we have to understand how harmful the greed and the hatred and the delusion, which those are very strong words, but by greed I mean just wanting and not wanting, right? Like craving, or hatred, like just jealousy of what somebody else might have, or delusion, the not knowingness of being confused about why we're doing the thing we're doing, or how we even got here, how harmful those things can be and how they drive us to do harmful things to our bodies, harmful things to our environments, right? And as we investigate those, so this willingness to move into that and this willingness to investigate that in a very beautiful way begins to grow the qualities, the inverse qualities of compassion and generosity and wisdom. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in this practice. It's so beautiful. You can feel that. You wouldn't still be doing this. I know many of you have been practicing for so many years now, and you wouldn't still be doing this if you didn't feel those qualities growing in you at least a little bit, right? Understanding this and seeing this for yourself is at the core of the third truth, which is that there is an end to the suffering. There is an end. It is not death, but there is an end. And this ebb and flow of giving and receiving, right? This giving to our practice, receiving from our practice, giving to the body, to the mind to the heart to the body. This beautiful system, and understanding and moving with that system. That's the core of the third truth, right? There is an end. And this leads us to the fourth, that there is a path. We are all on this path, right? In the leaning in the sitting with and being willing to be with what is uncomfortable and what is like honestly very painful sometimes to be with, what is often inconvenient for us to be with, we see that there is a path, right? That each step of letting go happens with the next step. So we have to leave the last step before we take the next step, right? And it happens one after the other. If you watch, if you pay attention to while you're walking, you'll feel that in the movement of taking the next step, your back foot starts to roll off of the ground. And then in the movement of that back foot coming forward, you roll through the front foot, right? And it just keeps moving one after the other. So this is the real vinyasa to me. This step by step, this being willing to leave and to arrive, and then to leave where we've arrived and arrive at a new place, and continuing on and on and on. This is the path. It's so wonderful. We're all on it. We're all here. I will say, this does bring to mind what I think is kind of a funny, but also very, very prescient quote by Chogyam Trungpa. If you don't know him, he is a meditation teacher. And his quote is this, I'm sorry that I have to read it. My advice to you is not to undertake the spiritual path. It is too difficult, too long, and it's too demanding. I suggest you ask for your money back and go home. This is not a picnic. It is really going to ask everything of you. So it's best to not begin. However, if you do begin, it's best if you finish. And that's where it is. It's best if you finish. Once you've started, you know that opening to this, it's like once your eyes have peeled open a little bit, you can't ever close them again. And I'm so sorry. I feel a little responsible, but also we're all in it together. It's okay. My teachers are responsible to me too for putting me here. But it's true that we can live in this world without letting the weight of it completely crush us, to completely flatten us, because we know that we are moving step by step. We are moving forward. And that each of these steps, right, begins with us and from there flows outward. And that's the wonderful thing about these qualities that we are cultivating beyond just having a nice floppy loose body that feels good. But these qualities of generosity and compassion and wisdom is that they move outward, right? We can't help but to share them because they become an integrated part of who we are. And that is such a lovely gift. And that is something that you are able to give to the world, and you do give to the world, whether you know it or not. Every interaction that you have, every choice that you make, every breath that you take, every breath that you give, you are giving that to the world. And so you can rest in that, right? When it's like, what more can I do? You can rest in that, just knowing that. So this is your permission slip or your encouragement or your welcome basket, if that's how you want to think of it, to just keep going. Step by step, just keep going, right? The fat lady has not sung yet. And we have to keep doing it. A beautiful Krishnamurti quote that I love and have really connected with recently. When the mind is at rest, neither seeking nor resisting a single thing, then not struggling with life, then, only then, is it possible to see what is true. And it is the truth that liberates us, not our efforts to be free. So let's sit with that just for a few minutes. We have about 20 minutes. You are welcome to be on your back. We'll have just a short amount of guidance, and then we'll just let ourselves be still. Just letting the body relax in whatever position that you're in. Feeling yourself connect to the earth, to the ground. Allowing yourself to be supported in that. And gently connecting to the lift of the heart. And the natural buoyancy of your heart and all that it contains. Feeling it bob up and down as you breathe with the diaphragm. And then just as it's possible to feel the body both grounded and rooted, while also feeling light and released through the heart, through the mind. It is possible to live in the paradoxical nature of being human. It is possible to allow yourself to be with both what is hard and what is sweet and what is loving and caring and tender. That one doesn't have to overtake the other. They can live harmoniously. And as you continue to let yourself relax, feel the breath take on a very natural rhythm, unrestrained, unprompted, soft and sweet. And then just as the breath moves through the lungs, moves through an alchemical process of oxygenating the blood, and then livening the tissues. We feel ourselves become boundaryless. Not only are we taking in and expelling breath, but we are breathing with the fabric of all that surrounds us. Every so often, you might notice if you've tensed anywhere in the body. You might notice if the mind feels rather dim and closed. And in that case, take the opportunity to invite yourself to relax. Stop trying so hard. Just allowing each breath to flow in and out. And allowing thoughts to come and go. And allowing thoughts to capture us. And then reminding ourselves that it's okay to let them go. Just allowing ourselves to be really soft, really fluid. Each step, each moment happening naturally, unfolding by its own accord. And if you feel yourself straining anywhere, trying to get to the next thing, allow yourself to relax. And allow yourself to release. You may notice a little wanting of something, or a little aversion, or not wanting something. You may feel a little foggy or laggy. That's all okay. Those are the places where, when we see it, there's an opportunity to invite compassion, invite generosity for yourself, invite the wisdom that this is not the way it will always be. And in that way, we let these fluctuations move through. And when we get caught, we let go. Oh, we see this path made before us. And we can read about it. And we can talk about it. And we can study it. And these are all good things. But as you're feeling right now, we also have to experience it for ourselves. Step by step. Allowing ourselves to unfold just as life unfolds around us. Thank you for your practice, everybody. Take your time. There is no rush at all to move from where you are. And I'll see you tomorrow morning, wherever you are on the spectrum of time, 9 a.m. for most of you. And we'll continue our work. So I hope you have a restful and peaceful evening. Maybe consider a little Epsom salt bath if you really want to just treat yourself. And it's always a pleasure. Love seeing you. So we'll see you tomorrow. Rest well.